While out whitetail deer hunting last year, Luke had an encounter with 3 aggressive and territorial Sasquatch. But before we get into his encounter, welcome back to Dark Wilderness, where I share encounters with the unexplained. If you've had an encounter that you would like to share, please email it to me at the link below. And if you like today's story, please gently slap that like button, as I'll be uploading 3 to 5 times every week. So don't forget to stalk that subscribe button through the woods so you don't miss out on any future content. Well, let's get into today's encounter. Late last October, Luke had headed out for a day of muzzleloading for whitetail deer out by the town of Marchand, Manitoba. Marchand's located about an hour southeast of Winnipeg, and to get to where Luke was going to be hunting that day, he had to drive down 15 miles of this old fire road. He said after driving down that fire road, he'd have to park his truck on the side of it and then walk 2 miles in on this little narrow overgrown quad trail. So on this morning, he parked his truck, got out, and he said as soon as he got out, he felt off. He said he can't quite explain what this feeling was. He just felt off, and it just didn't feel right. He felt pretty nervous that morning. So as he was grabbing all his gear, he decided he was going to bring in his 12 gauge with him, which is normally something you cannot do in Manitoba during muzzleloading season. You could only carry a muzzleloader or a crossbow. You can't carry anything else. But Luke did not care on this particular morning. He grabbed his 12 gauge, he loaded it with double aught buck and slugs, grabbed his muzzleloader, and he made his way down this trail. He said after walking about a mile down this trail, it comes to a spot where the trail goes up this ridge. And he said right as he got to the top of that ridge, he said it was like he hit a wall. He said he just instantly had this feeling of dread that just came out of nowhere. So he stopped. He said he took a couple breaths, figuring, maybe he's just on edge because of the feeling he had when he got out of his truck. So he just tried to calm himself down. After a few seconds, he tried to take a couple more steps forward. And he said as soon as he did that, that feeling of dread just amplified. He said he just had this feeling that if he kept going down this trail, something really bad was going to happen to him. So he said he just turned around and he started heading back towards the truck. After going a few hundred yards down the trail back to the truck, the trail forks off and goes north. Luke decided instead of going back to the truck, he was going to turn and take the trail north because he had another stand down that way as well. And he was out there to hunt, so he just wanted to hunt. So he was going to go sit in that stand, abandon going to that first one, and just hunt there for the day. So he said he made it all the way to his stand, no problem. He said he still felt pretty on edge the entire walk in, but it was nothing like he had experienced at the top of the ridge on that other trail. So he got to his stand, he climbed up, settled in, and his stand looks across this pine valley. And on the other side of that valley, on that other opposing ridge, is where his first stand is. That's the stand that he was initially going to go to. So he's sitting in his stand, and he's looking across at the bush line on the other ridge, and he can't see anything because it's so dark, but he could just kind of make out the silhouettes of the tops of the trees. So he's sitting there, and he said about 20 minutes later he decided he was going to have a cigarette. It was still probably about an hour before sunup. So he pulled his cigarettes out of his pocket, and he said as soon as he went to light his lighter and that flame came up, as soon as that flame came up, all of a sudden there was this deep guttural scream from across the valley on the ridge where he was going to be hunting initially. When that scream happened, it startled him, and he ended up dropping his lighter to the ground. So now not only is he terrified because of the scream, because he's not sure what it was, but now he's dropped his lighter. He really wanted to have a cigarette, he said. He said so he went to look down, and he said when he looked down the stand, at the very bottom of the tree, he could see this dark, massive silhouette right at the base of the tree. So he said he's looking down at this thing, trying to figure out what it is, figuring it's probably a bear. So he had a tactical flashlight that he pulled out of his jacket, clicked it on, and looked down, and he said as soon as that light came on, looking up at him was not a bear. He said looking up at him was this 10-foot tall Sasquatch just staring up at him. And he said as he's looking down with the light, looking up at the Sasquatch, he said this thing screams at him. And when it screamed, he could see its teeth. He said it's not like in a horror movie where they have jagged teeth. He said they were like big, flat teeth. But he screamed up at him. So he quickly grabs his 12 gauge and he's pointing it down at this thing because he doesn't know what it's going to do. He said as he's pointing his shotgun down at this thing, it turns and it just runs into the bushes. So he's still in a stand aiming down, just scared out of his mind. And he said all of a sudden there's another scream, but this time it came from the north, from to his left. So now he's freaking out because now he knows there's 3 of these things. There's one across this valley, there was the one underneath his stand, and now there's another one off to his left a couple hundred yards. So Luke said he just froze in place in his stand. He said he wasn't going to do anything until the sun came up. So he sat there for about another half an hour, and the sky was starting to turn gray at this point. And he's looking across that valley, and he sees 3 darker blobs on the other side of the valley along the tree line. So he's looking at them, and he's already thinking that, yeah, that those blobs are definitely these things that have been screaming at me. So he puts his 12 gauge beside him and he grabs his muzzle loader. He lifts his muzzle loader up and he said he cranked his power on a scope to maximum power and he was looking through it. And he said he could make out the shapes, but he still couldn't really see anything. So he just kept moving his scope from one of these figures to the next and to the next. And he said he did that for the next 20 minutes until it was full on light. And he said as it got light, every time his scope would be on one of these Sasquatches, they would just glare right back at him. And that went on for another 15 minutes. And Luke had had enough now. Now it's full on light out. So he decided he was going to make a break for his truck. So he grabbed his shotgun, slung it over his one shoulder, slung his muzzleloader over the other shoulder, and climbed down his stand. As he was going down his tree on his climbing sticks, he turned and looked across the valley, and all 3 of these things instantly started running south, the direction that he was going to be having to go. So he hits the ground, he turns, and he just starts sprinting south down the trail back to where that fork is. When he got to the fork, he turned, and now he started running towards his truck. He said he didn't even make it about 50 yards, and all of a sudden he could hear something to his right in the bush. He could just hear the bushes just snapping and cracking, and he could hear something breathing real heavy. So he turns his head and looks, and one of these Sasquatches is running parallel to him about 15 yards into the bush. And he said this thing's just barreling through tree branches, and the tree branches are actually just blowing apart as it's ramming into these things. So he said he starts just running even faster than he ever thought he was even able to. And he could hear as well to his left, but slightly behind him, one of the other ones running along the side of the trail as well. And one behind him. He said he could hear these real heavy footfalls. And he said that last mile running to the road, he could hear all 3 of these things breathing real heavy. And every once in a while, they would scream or yip towards each other. He said it was like they were communicating. He said he felt like he was being herded in a specific direction, which just so happened to be in the direction of his truck. So Luke's running down the trail. When he breaks the wood line and gets up to his truck, all the noise and commotion in the woods stopped. So he runs around the side of his truck, gets up to the driver's door. He goes to unlock the door and he looks, and all 3 of these Sasquatches are just staring right back at him from inside the bush line. So Luke opens his door, jumps in his truck, starts it, and he just floors it down this gravel road. He drove about a mile, and then he decided to actually turn around and go back because he was going to try to get a picture of these things, hoping kind of that they were still on the side of the road. So he's driving down the road. He gets back to where he had his truck parked, and they're gone. So he rolls his window down. And he just kind of sticks his head out the window to listen to see if he could hear anything at all. And all of a sudden, he could hear crashing coming through the woods directly towards him in his truck. So he's looking, and that 10-foot tall Sasquatch was running through the trees, pulling a big pine behind it. He said when this thing got to the edge of the bush line, hauling this big pine behind it, he said it stopped running, turned, and threw this pine tree at his truck. He said the pine slammed into the back driver's side of the box, shook his entire truck, and it actually blew out his back window. So Luke at this point now, he just pops it into drive and he just floors it out of there. He didn't want to tell anybody exactly what happened to his truck because he didn't want anybody to think he was crazy. So he just told everybody that he was driving down a road. He ended up going off and ended up sideswiping a tree. Luke said, though, that this experience has shaken him. He says he will never go hunting again. He will never go in the bush again. His advice is if you're ever out in the woods, never be alone. He said always go with somebody, always be armed. And he said if you do come across one of these, just turn around and get out of there without them noticing you. He does not recommend pointing a firearm at them. He said he doesn't know if it was him pointing his muzzleloader at them when they were on the other side of that valley that made all three of them chase him out of there. But he figures that even if you would have tried to shoot one, he doesn't know how much damage it would actually do to them. He said they're just so big and so muscular that it would take a very large caliber to put one down. He said, so don't let a rifle or something give you a false sense of security with these things, because he really doesn't think it'll be that effective. Well, that's it for Luke's encounter. Thank you for joining us. And hey guys, if you have any comments on this one, pop them down in the comments below. I really like to know what you guys think of this. I know personally, if I got chased out of the woods by 3 Sasquatch, I'm not going back there to take any pictures. So if you guys like this story though, remember, please slap that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please click that subscribe button. And I'll see you next time.